Happy politics, and welcome to your favorite BC political podcast. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I am joined, as per usual, in a socially distant manner by...
I'm Jordan Bateman. I am a co-owner of the Green Bay Packers football club, based in Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of 13 World Championships and 4 Super Bowls. I'm also VP Communications for the Independent Contractors and Business Association, but I think those are my credentials now going forward.
Fair enough. Co-owner of the Green Bay Packers, and thus Aaron Rodgers' boss.
That's right. Well, and subtly, through Aaron Rodgers, I'm actually a co-owner, apparently, of the Chicago Bears as well, because he owns them.
Nice. So, I expect you to give your employee a stern talking to about the benefits or lack thereof. Is it ivermectin, the horse paste?
Yep. We've had this discussion. Coincidentally, Rodgers has complained of a bad toe. There's a lot of talk in Green Bay. It's COVID toe, which is actually quite serious, but whatever.
Need a horseshoe.
Apologies to everyone off the top who did not tune in for Green Bay Packer talk, but Maclean and I need a different podcast.
And speaking of apologies, I am home with a sick 6-year-old, so if you hear something in the background, I apologize in advance. He's fine. He's playing Lego, but attention spans are what they are. Jordan, this is the second time in less than 12 hours that we have been together in the virtual space. Last night we co-hosted our second Twitter space after a BC Liberal leadership debate, and speaking of the Twitter space, I thought it went very well again.
Yeah, I did too. My wife, she gives me the gears because it's such a politically nerdy thing to do. She's like, who cares about this? I'm like, the 100 people who are on Twitter doing things, they care. And so thank you for joining us. We had 5 of the 6 candidates. We had interim leader Shirley Bond. Mike Klassen popped in to give us an urban view. I thought it's a lot of fun, and we enjoy it. And I think we're slowly getting better at it with every time. Much like the candidates in that debate, we're only getting better as we get more practice.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The candidates, I would say all 6 were either the same or better in terms of their presentation and their polish from the first time around, which only makes sense. We're talking about a lot of either rookie or rusty politicians for whom not to go back to football, but need the reps behind the line. And this was I was going to say cleaner. We'll get to that in a second, but this seemed like a more sort of tight, more polished debate than the first time.
Yeah, look, I think Kevin Falcon wins by virtue of not being the subject of everyone's ire, unlike the first debate. When you're the front runner and you can get through a whole debate without anyone landing a glove on you, that's a victory. I've talked to some of his folks today, and they are all very pleased with how it went. They felt like, especially in the second half of the debate, they saw the rest had come off Kevin. He was engaging, and he was doing the things that endear Falcon to so many people in the party. And look, Ellis Ross, at least anecdotally, feels like he's been gaining momentum throughout this campaign. And it was very clear the other 4 candidates felt that way because they did whatever they could to kind of beat him down a little bit. And you and I talked about last night. I did not have a 20-minute pile on Ellis Ross on my bingo card. Yeah. But we learned a lot about Ellis, but we also learned a lot about the other candidates as well. So I think that's what most BC Liberal members will be talking about after watching it.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to tell in real time whether it was, their concerns with Ellis Ross, the candidate, or if it was, political gamesmanship and where they see the campaigns at that particular moment in time. And you're right. I think that it did sort of appear very much as though there's a bit of a race for the second place on the first ballot there. Because if you've watched really any party leadership contest across the country, it's not necessarily who wins the first ballot. In fact, it often is not. And so being sort of the consensus second choice sometimes is the best place to be. And so, I mean, that could be behind a lot of what might have seemed disproportionate attention focused on Ellis Ross last night.
Yeah, and, Val Litwin, as he was asking Ellis about climate change and Ellis's views on climate change, posted video of Ellis at a forum saying that climate change wasn't real, and the boos and the hisses from the crowd in that video. It's a very effective 2-minute video that Ellis will have trouble with if he wins and becomes the leader of the BC Liberal Party. The NDP will flash that everywhere. at a time where there's more attention being put on climate change than ever before, and where the real debate isn't anymore, is climate change real? It's the real debate is, how do we protect British Columbia from the ravages of it, given the piss poor job the NDP have been doing in the past few years, or the past year with their reaction to forest fires, heat dome, and the floods and mudslides. So, that's, we've talked often about how we don't see Ellis in the House get a very rough ride from the NDP, that they treat him with a quiet deference because of his stature as a key Indigenous leader. That was not the case last night on that debate stage. And I've always been curious, like, how does Ellis respond when he's questioned? And, will he come off as defensive or angry, or, like, how does he react to it? And so I found that 20 minutes fascinating, because it was a side of Ellis I hadn't seen before. And I thought he handled himself well. He, he didn't flip-flop on his view. He talked about an evolution of views. He certainly hit an interesting point, which is, we can talk about climate change all we want, but we've got to make sure that we're addressing it in a way that doesn't, hurt people's pocketbooks, that doesn't entrench unaffordability in this province. They got a little hung up on the side issue of electric cars. Electric cars are a small piece of this whole thing, but by no means like the litmus test for climate change. There was a lot there, and I've been thinking about that exchange quite a bit since in the hours since.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on it off the top. I would have expected this debate to look more like the last debate in terms of the focus being on Kevin Falcon, whom everyone seems to agree is the front runner, which some people, just as a quick aside, I have heard from some that they perceive front runner to be a negative term, which it kind of baffled me. Exactly, you're kind of shrugging too. And look, I don't mean it that. I just meant it as a more neutral way to say the favorite.
Yeah.
But
better
if you disagree,
and
some people have that front runner is apparently a negative term. It certainly is not intended that way. That's for sure.
No, and certainly better than being last place.
Well, yeah.
I want to be the front runner.
Well, and I asked one of them, well, what should I say instead? Because obviously, if it sounds like I'm, commentating or putting a value judgment on a not, and they said, well, I think favorite. Well, I think that's actually backwards. But anyway, let's not get stuck down that rabbit hole. Kevin Falcon, favorite or front runner, is seemingly in first place, and so I would have thought that he would have gotten a lot more attention. I mean, he must have just, when the portion of the debate where they were asking each other questions passed, I mean, he must have been having to do everything he could to stop from, dancing a jig, because like that was always going to be the danger zone for him, where, that if they wanted to lavish attention on him, they could have. And I mean, they just didn't.
Yeah. In our post-game show on Twitter, we asked Michael Lee about this, because and look, in our Twitter spaces, we try to be pretty upbeat. These candidates are all coming in voluntarily to talk with us. I don't think we're trying to knock any of them down by any stretch of imagination. But I had to ask Michael, do you consider the issue that happened with your campaign manager and the volunteers from the Falcon team who treated her just so disgustingly, do you consider that to be a closed issue because it wasn't brought up in this debate? And he kind of did the lawyerly, it's before the courts kind of thing. It's not before the courts, but, it's being looked at by LEOC and investigated by the Falcon Commission, or the Falcon campaign. So there's no, maybe they don't consider the matter closed, but he didn't bring it up at all in that thing. And surely Kevin was prepared for that and waiting for that question. I have no idea what the answer would have been and how Kevin would have reacted. But it never came. And to me, that was a weird thing, because that was the dominant issue in this campaign a few weeks ago. The Lee campaign really is known now for two things: chasing Aaron Gunn out of the race, which is the perception, whether they did it or not. That is the perception, because they came out with a press release calling on LEOC to take Aaron Gunn out. And then the response to this, to what happened to Diamond. And Gunn kind of came up early on, and then it was sort of glossed over.
It kind of got overshadowed as other things came up afterwards, but it did, yeah.
And then the Diamond Eisinger piece did not come up at all. And I just found that a very curious decision by the Lee campaign.
Yeah, I mean, from talking to a number of the campaigns, I got the sense, and I will preface this by saying it's just a sense, that this was an issue that a lot of the candidates assumed someone else would bring up. At some point. And obviously that just didn't happen. I can see if you're a candidate other than Michael Lee or Kevin Falcon, you would say, well, that's not your story to tell, or it's not your question to ask. And if you're Michael Lee, you don't want it to be, well, this is the only thing that my campaign has brought to light in terms of news. And obviously you're Kevin Falcon, you don't want to bring it up at all. So, I mean, I can kind of understand why it didn't, but yeah, I think it should have at least been addressed in some form or other, saying, at the very least, it's being looked at, and we're not ready to come to a conclusion yet, which obviously is the case. But at the very least, acknowledging that it happened and that it can't happen again.
Yeah, so we did touch on equity-seeking groups and how to encourage fewer pale, stale, and male candidates from running for the BC Liberals. That's the joke about the BC Liberals' presence in Vancouver last time. That's an interesting omission from that. And you brought up the point. I wonder what the media think about that being left out of it. I'm not sure any media were watching, to be honest. Haven't seen any covers this morning, but.
Yeah, none whatsoever, to be honest, which is a little surprising. But I think we talked about this last night, is that after the events of last weekend, for some reason, the pandemic started this, but BC's political reporters have become disaster reporters. It started with them becoming full-time COVID reporters, and now it's floods and everything else. And so, I mean, a lot of them are just exhausted, and they can't work 12-hour days forever. And in fact, in a lot of cases, their unions prohibit it. So I think the debate last night kind of fell victim to that a little bit.
Yeah. If Kevin won that debate by not being the center of attention, I'd say Gavin probably placed second. He came in as very different from his first debate. The great thing about Gavin is he learns from his experiences, and when he gets feedback, he makes changes. And one of the things that he got feedback on last time was you were looking too much at notes. He went in this one with no notes. And so he's talking directly to camera, he's thinking on his feet, and Gavin is a very smart guy and can do that, and it showed. I thought he was much more comfortable. I thought he had that well-timed challenge when there's 20 minutes of jumping all over Ellis. You notice he didn't challenge it at the 10-minute mark or the 12-minute mark or the 15 mark. He challenged it at the end after all the damage had been done, and then he came out and said, oh, by the way, we really should be working together and none of this divisive stuff, and we have a lot more in common than we have. Kind of that attempt to manufacture a Gordon Wilson moment. Why can't we all just get along? I thought that was very effective. I think that exasperated Val, who circled back to it later on with the challenge card. Val, why are you using a challenge card to ask Gavin Dew a question? You're trying to, if the front runners in this race are Falcon, Ross, and Lee, that's where the attention should be focused. But instead it's, Gavin, last time you were the spicy one, and this time you're telling us to be all kumbaya. Well, I mean, it's sort of an irrelevant question to ask, but clearly kind of got under Val's skin just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if this was the only debate that the party was going to have in its leadership contest, then I would be the first to say that was a waste of time. But because there's going to be a few more, and this was the second, sure, I guess you can have a little bit of I'm going to call out that. I mean, the other thing that was mentioned is Gavin, he said unintentionally after the fact is he didn't realize that he actually started going into his opening statement when he was supposed to just say hi. Oh. And they were going to do the introductions like, this is Gavin Dew, and they'll just say, good evening. And he just went right into his speech. And the camera was sort of locked on a wide shot for a few minutes. And you could see some of the other candidates going, okay, is this what we're doing? Oh, all right, sure. Roll with the punches.
He was ready to go. He was eager. So we'll say a false start, offense,
5 yards,
5-yard penalty, and we'll repeat first down, I guess.
Yeah, and so there was. It's fair to point out that there was probably a little too much debate about the debate last night, but I suspect that will not be repeated next time. If I don't know this. But I suspect the rules of the debate will be a little more clearly firmed up and articulated before the next one.
Yeah. I think maybe because the first one went very smoothly, maybe everyone assumed that they all knew the rules.
Yeah.
Shout out to Maz Artang, who did a fine job moderating in his turtleneck. Well done. He was just so casual with his turtleneck. Everyone else was wearing a collared shirt, but not Maz.
Yes.
Hipsters. You gotta love them. But he did a good job, and it's a hard thing. The challenge cards, I'm still a little unclear on the rules, but like I said last night, it's like Survivor. They don't tell us all the rules. They don't tell the public all the rules that the candidates know. So you have to trust that they're following them. And I think you're right. I think they'll clean that up for next time. Although I know there are other debates planned that may or may not have Maz or the party so actively involved. For example, I've heard the Surrey Board of Trade has one.
Oh, really?
Now I'm trying to get confirmation on that, and we'll find out the date. But so it may be beyond party walls. So we may see different formats going forward.
And, actually, I think that's a great idea. This is the first I'm hearing this. But, I mean, we talked about this last night in the Twitter space because last night's debate was held right here in Victoria. Mm-hmm. And they brought up a very, in fact, almost exclusively island issue, and that's cost of ferry fares. But it's good if you're going to have a debate in a place like Surrey, which is, besides being, electorally significant, has its own issues and problems and things that need attention on the provincial level. It'd be great to have them go in depth a little on, Surrey-specific issues that, definitely have not gotten play in Vancouver and Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in Surrey, you can imagine the Surrey police referendum. Mm-hmm. So there'd be a referendum would come up. Surrey, one of the big growing communities, the fastest growing community probably still in British Columbia. Affordability, growth, how does that all play together? Social housing, maybe more on the opioid crisis. Surrey's Fraser Health is a kind of ground zero for that crisis. And then, the South, the very influential and involved South Asian community here. They'll have questions. So yeah, there's a lot there that can be mined. And look, Surrey has 9 ridings. Mm-hmm. If you add in kind of the Langley ones, which are different than Surrey. Langley, we Langley people were different than Surrey. The future lives in Surrey. We live next door to the future. But still, Delta, that's a lot of South Fraser ridings that the BC Liberals have to be competitive in and win a bunch back. So it makes sense to have a debate focused on those South Fraser issues.
Well, I hope that happens. I think it's a great idea. And again, I'm learning about this as you are, dear viewers, because I actually didn't know that. We ran through the candidates last night. The other one, I think of all the 6 candidates, the one who got the least airtime last night was Renee Merrifield. I think that's true. I'm not sure she was asked a question, and of course, she contributed to the asking questions and answering the questions from the field. But am I right about that? Did Renee get the least amount of airtime?
I think so. I think Renee had a better performance in this one than the last one. I thought her energy was good. I thought her tone was good. The one question where I thought she might really shine was on the healthcare question. I've seen her in a different venue talk about healthcare. It's just so hard in 1 minute. How are you going to solve healthcare? I don't know. It's like
60 seconds go.
Yeah, $20 billion, $25 billion of spending a year, and how am I going to solve it? But she has served previously on the board of the Interior Health Authority, so she does have, firsthand knowledge of the challenges facing, especially doctors and nurses outside the Lower Mainland. So maybe I wanted just a little bit more from that. But again, tough in 60 seconds to articulate your vision for healthcare, a $25 billion a year spend in this province.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. We've talked about Gavin, we've talked about Renee. We've touched on Val Litwin. I thought Val was, presentation-wise, I don't know what advice you'd give Val other than maybe you look down at your notes a little too often. But again, this is his second debate, so plenty of room there. He's his same usual very polished, very telegenic self. He is doing a better job, I think, about sort of identifying policy areas that he's going to try and lay claim to. He really focused on climate change last night, which was, I think, smart on his part. And the one thing I always notice about Val is he's very, very, very good at never going too high and never getting too low. He's always in that sort of conversational, engagey. He's usually smiling even when he's not happy about something. It's very effective.
for a while I've been like, who does Val remind me of in this race? But you know who he reminds me of? Peter Fassbender. Kind of that polished, they'd be very good at sales, right? You'd be like, let me buy that lemon of a used car. Like they just are so good at at that kind of, polished, engaging. Like, it's hard for me to put a finger on, but if you know Fassbender, that's kind of how I feel about Val Litwin here. I thought Val's team did an excellent job of rolling out video of Ellis Ross while they were talking about climate change. Val's team clearly understood that, everyone's watching this on Facebook on a laptop or on a phone or whatever, and probably has multiple streams open. They probably are following it along on Twitter too. So they kind of use that as a second screen experience. That takes a level of sophistication and planning, which, I as a campaigner quite enjoy to see. I think is important. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure where Val goes from here. I don't get the sense that his campaign has caught fire and is signing up big rafts of members. I think he has an important voice in the race, but I'm not sure the path. I'm just not sure what the path to victory is for Val going forward. So, not a bad performance by any means. I kind of thought he was better in the first debate than the second one, but maybe that's just because I like that operating system analogy that he used in the first one.
You were very taken by that.
Yes, I was quite taken by that. And the second one, he didn't really have that same kind of shiny takeaway. And I do think it was a mistake to waste a challenge question on Gavin.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. It's, obviously unplanned in the heat of the moment, so it was an interesting thing to do. You're right. I mean, it's when you say you don't know the path to victory is here, I think that most people observing this are not considering Val among the front runners. I use that word again, to win this thing. But that does not mean that he should not be considered. Whoever does win, if it's not Val Litwin, they should do everything they can to recruit him to win, because they need people like Val Litwin very, very badly, especially in urban areas. I mean, I knew this, and I guess I'd forgotten that he's actually from Vancouver Island, but he's clearly much more associated with Vancouver now, and that just seems, one of those ridings seems like an obvious place to put him.
Yeah, you think about the need to recruit new candidates. Val's the kind of person who, you could send out with the leader to recruit a new candidate. That. Yeah, he'd be very good in that role, and that's important because there's only 25 held ridings for the BC Liberals, 30. That's a lot of nominations you got to find, and I think a lot of those 25 or 30 may turn over as well. So you're going to have to go out there and find 60 to 70 new candidates that are representative of all of British Columbia. That's going to take a lot of time and effort for a new leader, and he's going to need people like Val Litwin to step up and run in one of those ridings, and also try to help recruit other people to do the same.
Have we touched on all six today?
I think so.
We have. I think so. We talked about Michael. We didn't specifically say here's what we're going to talk about Michael Lee. But yeah, so it's final impressions were that we talked about this last night. For me, the takeaway was all the attention focused on Ellis Ross. I mean, it's hard to see how that would not be the headline or the conclusion from somebody watching this debate. Oh,
for sure. Episode 1 of this show was about Kevin Falcon. Episode 2 was about Ellis Ross. I'm curious what episode 3 will bring. But we will. We'll be there. We'll be watching, so it'll be intriguing to see. I thought the debate started slow. I think part of that is, with so many folks struggling right now because of the floods and mudslides, and the sense that the community spirit that's emerged, where we're really proud of how we're pulling together and trying to help folks. It makes it very difficult to flip the switch to being, now I'm angry at my competitor here, right? But once they finally got into it a little bit, they found their feet and off they went.
Yeah, and I think also a bit of a sense that all the action in these debates really happens when they're asking each other questions. And so when they start with a question from the field on a subject that there's going to be broad agreement, specifically the situation in Abbotsford, I mean, it's hard not for all 6 answers were always going to be pretty similar on that question. And, there are 6 of them. So after your 6th minute of, we have to do more for Abbotsford, et cetera, and so forth, it can be a little, okay, when do the knives come out?
Yeah, you're precisely right, yep.
Anything else from the debate last night?
No, I'm good. Just enjoy hearing people on Twitter Spaces. We're trying to download it from Twitter, and we'll post it in the podcast feed later. But it's slower. For some reason, it's slow. Apparently, there's a new record button I didn't see on there, so we will do that for the next time.
Oh, excellent.
Quicker.
And we got this time. You mentioned before we got 5 out of 6 candidates. Next time we're shooting for 6 out of 6, and Kevin Falcon, this means you, my friend. So we hope you pop by in the next one.
Yeah, Kevin, come on. I mean, it's just me and Maclean. What could go wrong?
I love the ominous smile at the end there. This will not be a long episode of BC Poly Hot Stove. I can see my 6-year-old peeking around the corner, wondering when he's allowed to bother me. I will be just a moment. And so until then, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. That over there is my son. This is BC Poly Hot Stove.